To understand how we got to the current war in Ukraine, we have to rewind much further back than 2022. For centuries, the lands we now call Ukraine were divided between empires: Russian, Austro-Hungarian, Polish. There was a Ukrainian language, culture, and identity, but not a stable, independent state. That chance only really arrived at the very end of the 20th century. In 1991, as the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine declared independence and put the decision to a referendum. The vast majority of the population voted in favor. The modern Ukrainian state was born, with its capital in Kyiv, internationally recognized borders, and its own seat at the United Nations. The 1990s were tough. A chaotic economic transition, corruption, and oligarchs carving up whole sectors of the economy. At the same time, the country was divided between two main visions. One part of society wanted to move closer to Western Europe. Another saw Russia as its natural partner and the heir to the old Soviet space. In 2004, the so-called Orange Revolution erupted. After presidential elections marked by massive fraud allegations, hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets. The protests forced a rerun of the second round, and the candidate who favored a more democratic and pro-European direction won. It was the first big signal to the world that a large part of Ukrainian society did not want to go back to being a satellite of Moscow. But internal tension didn't disappear. In 2010, Viktor Yanukovych, a figure closer to the Kremlin, became president. In 2013, when it looked like Ukraine was about to sign a key association agreement with the European Union, Yanukovych backed out at the last moment and leaned toward Russia instead. That decision lit the fuse of the Euromaidan movement, months of protests in central Kyiv that ended with dozens of people killed and the president fleeing the country. This is where the conflict with Russia changes scale. Taking advantage of the power vacuum, in 2014, Russian forces took control of Crimea and organized a referendum that Ukraine and most countries consider illegal. Shortly after, Moscow announced the annexation of the peninsula. At the same time, in the eastern regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, war broke out between Ukrainian forces and separatist groups supported politically, militarily, and financially by Russia. From 2014 to 2022, there was a low-intensity war. Trenches, occasional shelling, thousands of dead, but no major changes to the front lines. Meanwhile, Kyiv tried to move closer to Europe and to Western military structures, strengthened its army, and prepared, as far as possible, for a larger conflict that many could already see coming. Russia, for its part, saw these moves as a direct threat to its influence in the region and kept talking about Ukraine as part of its historical sphere of influence. The decisive jump came on February 24, 2022, when Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Attacks from the north, east, and south, missiles striking multiple cities, tank columns advancing towards Kyiv. The stated goals were to demilitarize and denazify the country. In practice, it was an attempt to change Ukraine's government and bring it firmly back under Russian control. Ukraine resisted, stopped the advance on the capital, and over time recaptured territory in the north, in the Kharkiv region, and in parts of the south. From 2023 onward, the front began to stabilize. Neither side could achieve decisive breakthroughs. The war turned into a conflict of attrition: artillery, drones, constant attacks on enemy positions and on energy infrastructure, especially in cities like Kharkiv. Many analysts started talking about an active stalemate, heavy casualties and huge costs, but few changes on the map. And that is how we reach the present. Almost 4 years after the full-scale invasion, Ukraine is still defending the independence it won in 1991, with part of its territory occupied and its economy badly hit, but with support from many Western countries. Russia, meanwhile, is preparing for a long war, reshaping its economy, and tightening its internal politics, convinced that time is on its side. What we see today in the headlines isn't a conflict that appeared out of nowhere. It's the result of more than 30 years of tension over a single underlying question. Will Ukraine be a fully independent country with its own political path, or just another piece in Moscow's wider project of power? That is the story that is still being written on the battlefield.